In the midst of a crisis like Crimea, the president's national security advisor is charged with keeping the president up to the minute on developments, advising the president how to proceed, and ensuring that the president's decisions are actually carried out. Until 9 months ago, that job belonged to my next guest, Tom Donilon. Welcome back to the show, Tom.
Thank you, Fareed. Good to see you. Good morning.
My impression is, on the basis of some intelligence reports that we've heard about at CNN, that Russian forces are consolidating their control over Crimea. In fact, perhaps even poised to do more than that. Is that what you're hearing, and how dangerous is this?
Well, that's what I see as well. The Russians have put in place a full occupation at Crimea. They are intensifying their position there. They're reinforcing their position there. They've become much more aggressive. They turned away monitors from the OSCE and the UN yesterday again through firing shots. It's an exceedingly dangerous situation right now, and you have a dynamic where you have Ukraine soldiers on bases basically held hostage by Russian soldiers. In a situation like that, anything can happen, and I think it's just an exceedingly dangerous, intense situation right now, because if you did have, God forbid, an exchange of fire between Ukraine and Russian soldiers, you would have a real escalation of this crisis.
Tom, you've met with Putin one-on-one several times. You spent hours with him the night before his inauguration in 2012. What kind of a man is he?
Well, he's a man for which concepts like balance of power and sphere of influence are very real concepts. I think he's evolved here in his view to have a really kind of a zero-sum view of international relations. He's tried to carve out a distinct Russian foreign policy, moved away from any integrative instinct of his foreign policy or his of Russia into the West in terms of political action. He is, as I said, very focused on spheres of influence. Feels real threats. You outlined in the top of your package here today the kinds of threats I think he views. Sees conspiracy around most developments. Certainly saw the West as as behind the fall of Yanukovych and Ukraine moving to the West. And he had here a situation where he had a real threat to what he regards as a sphere of influence, which is basically the former Soviet republics, when Ukraine did turn to Europe, even turn to open up an association agreement or a free trade agreement. Even that move to the West was too much for Putin. And he has this fanciful, as you know, Fareed, kind of a fanciful idea that he can build a Eurasian Union that would be a counterpoint to the European Union. That's fanciful at best, but even he knows it would be impossible without Ukraine.
And what does he plan for Ukraine? Because it appears that Crimea is now under his control. There will be a referendum so that the de facto authority is then bolstered by some kind of de jure authority. But is he presumably going to continue to try to influence the rest of Ukraine through various kinds of intelligence operations, money, things like that, bribing politicians? That has been what they've done in the past, after all.
Yeah, I think that is, and those are the sources of their influence there. This is a full-fledged kind of black op in Crimea right now, with multiple elements to it: information warfare, military action, and political action, including the putting on this referendum. What I think the goal here is to get more influence in the situation, to regain leverage, to be able to influence Ukraine's future, and I fear, also to be in a position to destabilize the situation. And also, I think he wanted to put himself in a situation here to give him the most leverage in any negotiations that go forward. But this was, I think, he got back from the Sochi Olympics, where they had spent $50 billion trying to enhance the image of Russia, had a real blow to what he considered as key geostrategic interests. They acted here to try to regain some leverage in the situation, as I said, and be in a position here to perhaps act to destabilize and undermine the new Ukraine government, which makes the other lines of effort we can talk about here in terms of reinforcing our support for the interim government in Ukraine all the more important.
Tom, what can we do? If you were advising the president now, the Europeans are probably almost certainly not going to go along with truly comprehensive sanctions because they get 30% of their natural gas from Russia. There would be blackouts in Europe without it. So the United States is going to get probably some partial sanctions, which will be limited. Perhaps it can do some things unilaterally. What are American options?
Well, I think we need to have a number of lines of effort here, and I don't agree with the proposition that there's not a lot that we can do here. Number one, we need to reinforce politically the interim government in Kiev and embrace that government. I'd have the next foreign ministers meeting around this issue in Kiev. Second, to support that government financially as it gets through these elections and beyond, and the United States and the Europeans are doing that. Third, to continue the efforts that John Kerry and others and Chancellor Merkel and others have underway to de-escalate and try to reach some sort of negotiated solution. By the way, President Obama, Chancellor Merkel, and others have provided Putin with an off-ramp if he wants to take it. Fourth, I think it's critical that we continue to reinforce our NATO commitments and reassure our NATO partners. And fifth, to show increased cost to Putin for escalation. I think, Fareed, if he continues to escalate the way we've seen over the last few days in Crimea, not taking any steps towards a diplomatic resolution, I think you'll see the Europeans support sanctions. And I want to make one point here. You know, it's the analytical point, and I think maybe missing in the Kremlin right now in terms of their analysis. Putin can stand aside politically. He can try to carve out this defiant, if you will, posture to the world politically. He's obviously rejecting, he was part of rejecting a UN observer and an OSCE observer in Crimea to have an objective look at what was going on. Russia's a member of those organizations. He can strike this defiant pose. But what Russia can't do in a globalized economy, of course, is to isolate their economy. And that's, I think, really where the leverage is here. You know, someone wrote in a column the other day, I think it was in the New York Times, that in 1968, of course, in August of 1968, the Russians invaded Czechoslovakia. And there wasn't the question is, what happened to the Russian stock market then? Well, nothing happened because they didn't have a stock market. Russia is integrated in the international economy right now, and that's where the leverage is.
Tom Donilon, thank you very much. Very important words. Lots more ahead. We've got a great panel standing by to look more closely at Russia's motivations in this crisis. I have some of the best Russian experts in the world.
Fareed Zakaria GPS, brought to you by Charles Schwab. Own your tomorrow.